You're good to go.
All right. So, my name is Eliot Green.
Hi, Eliot.
Hey, what's going on? I'm a history teacher. I teach normally to middle school, but I love talking about history. And the goal today is to walk you through the fall of the Roman Republic, because republics fall in somewhat similar ways. And many of the things that happened back then have strangely odd parallels to what we're going through right now. So we're going to try and cover a lot of ground. We're going to try and cover about 300 years or so, and try and connect that to the modern day equivalent. So we got to start at the simplest level, that Rome has basically 4 periods of expansion. It begins with the conquering of the Italian peninsula, moves to the conquering of the nearby areas on the northern shore, and Carthage, basically breaking out of the kind of isolation that takes place of the Italian peninsula. They build a fleet, moving into kind of the end of the Republic, Caesar taking over Gaul, and the conquering of Egypt through Cleopatra, and then the expansion during the Empire, the constant wars that we kind of think of when we think of Rome. Now, in order to understand Rome, you got to understand like a couple of basic facts. We're going to do like 5 minutes of context, and we'll break into our understanding there. So Rome had 2 classes. They had a protected upper class, very similar to the nobles in Europe. They're called the patricians. And the patricians are legally protected. They control pretty much most of the power at the beginning of the Republic. And they're just incredibly wealthy. Everyone else, the other 95% of people who live in Rome, are plebeians, or plebes as I'm going to call them for the rest of it. And the plebes have very little power. But over the course of the Republic, as with any society that's pretending to be just, those without power will attempt to gain power bit by bit. And by the end of the Republic, the plebes actually have a pretty strong amount of power. They step by step gain that power through systematic resistance. The big thing you have to understand about the government is their government is very similar to our government. They have an executive branch known as the magistrates that basically take care of all the things that we do. And there's roles in the executive branch similar to ours, that you get elected to one and that will lead you to getting elected to the next one. The main difference between them is they have something called a consul. And a consul is sort of a king, sort of a president. They actually stole the idea of consuls from the Spartans, but you're going to have 2 of them. One basically to go out and do war, and the other to take care of stuff in the city. And the goal is, by electing 2 of these leaders, they'll always be able to counter the other if any of them get too much power. This system will generally hold until Caesar, though there's every once in a while where one of the consuls will gain too much power, and we'll talk about that later in the lecture. You have the assemblies, and the assemblies are similar to our democracy if it was incredibly and brutally corrupt. So in the assembly, you get a certain number of votes, right? That votes is based on your tribe, but if you're a plebe, your tribe may have 5,000 people in it, and if you're a patrician, your tribe may have 20 people in it, and that's the same number of votes. Very similar to our Senate would be the way to think about it, how population didn't really matter, etc. And last but not least, you have the Senate. And the Senate is a consolidated power. It is where all the rich people stay, and they'll rotate from the Senate into these other positions and then back to the Senate. So you'll be elected consul, then you'll go back to the Senate. You'll be elected tribune, you'll go back to the Senate. The last group you need to know about are the tribunes, and the tribunes are fascinating. The tribunes basically are supposed to represent the plebeians. The plebes at one point literally stood up and walked out of the city and said, "We're not going to work for you unless you give us some sort of representation." And the patricians are like, "My milk didn't get delivered today." So they gave them this role of the tribunes, which is 10 dudes that at any point can say no. That is their main power. They get to say no, right? No, we're not doing this. No, we're not paying this tax. No, that law doesn't work. They get full veto power over anything that's happening in Rome. And eventually they'll gain a little more power and start to be able to suggest some laws, etc. But what their real job is just to protect the lower class. All right, that's the basics of government and that's going on. There are 2 tensions, though, in their society. You have the upper class and lower class, as in any society, right? That's going to be one tension. And the second tension that's going to happen is between those who are the citizens who have lived in Rome the whole time and the conquered peoples, the other Italians, right? We might think of that as a similar situation to how in America we look at outside influence and the fear of the right here in this country of like other voices coming in and taking over, great replacement theory, etc. Right? So that idea also existed back in Rome, that if they give too much power to other groups, right, it'll weaken the core of the Roman ideal. So this is the framework that you're going to see to set up, and now we can kind of move into the good stuff. All right. So, in order to get to the fall of the Republic, it all starts with one war. That war is called the Punic Wars. And the Punic Wars are the one that you hear about if you've ever heard of the name of Hannibal. The Punic Wars start over Sicily. Now, the best way to describe Sicily would be Taiwan, right? It is an incredibly important resource that without much of the foundation of the empire, they wouldn't be able to move forward. So they're going to invest lots of resources to make sure they control it. Now, Taiwan originally was controlled by Carthage. Carthage is a city down here in southern Africa, in Tunisia. Similar as in they need to protect it. Carthage controls most of the Mediterranean. They are a Phoenician colony. The Phoenicians were the group of seafaring people that actually came from here, but they set up colonies all over antiquity, and this was the one that stuck and grew the most. Carthage is in control of part of Sicily, but Rome really, really wants the grain that's growing in Sicily. This fantastic farmland, right? It's really easy to grow stuff. So when a group of Greeks say, hey, Rome, we don't really want Carthage here. We would really love to sell some of this cheap grain to you. Rome jumps at the occasion. And the First Punic War is fought between Rome up here and Carthage down, and the people of Carthage there. Now, this is the Carthaginian port. Around here are all where they would keep their ships. They would row their ships out and row it. So it was one of the best protected and natural harbors in the world. Now, what's fascinating about this First Punic War is there's a guy by the name of Hamilcar. Now, Hamilcar is running basically the main defense of Sicily, but he ends up losing, and he has his 10-year-old son with him, and he makes his son make a blood oath. This kid's literally 10, like little kid, makes a blood oath, like you will fight the Romans until you die. For the rest of your life, you will hate these people, because he believed he could have won the war, and if Carthage had invested more money in troops, he actually probably could have. Carthage was really good at navy fighting. They were really good on the sea, but they lost most of their fights on land. So Hamilcar was like, all we got to do is draw them out into the sea and we win this war. This is not hard. It's an island. We just have to defend the island, get them at sea, we win. They won't listen to him. So Hamilcar loses, and he actually takes his family and he moves to another area owned by the Carthaginians, which is down here in southern Spain. And Hamilcar's last name is Barca, which becomes, the area he lands in becomes Barcelona, right? It's named after his family. So Hamilcar's son is a guy by the name of Hannibal. And Hannibal you may know of. Hannibal, in order to win the Punic Wars, the Romans realize that they have to be able to fight on sea. So they start developing a navy. And the First Punic War lasts about 23 years. And over those 23 years, they get incredibly adept at building boats. They're able to build a full naval vessel in less than 60 days. And 3 times over the course of those 23 years, the Romans raise enough money and build a full fleet of 120 ships in less than 60 days. The boat they build is called a corvus. And a corvus is basically this device. They realized they couldn't beat the Carthaginians at sea, but what they could do is fight them like they fight on land. So they literally just built a giant, literal spiked ramp that they would drop into the Carthaginian boats and then fight them as if they were fighting on land. And this proved incredibly effective. The Carthaginians could defeat them if they could ram them, but if they missed their ramming or if there was a second boat, they lost all their sea battles. And in fact, the Romans get so good over those 23 years that the final battle of the First Punic War is a straight-up naval battle, which the Romans win. So, the one thing you have to understand about Rome is they're incredible at stealing other people's ideas. They stole the idea of the corvus from Syracuse, and they're going to use this idea of stealing after. So, First Punic War, Rome. This leaves us with a very angry Hannibal. So Hannibal gathers up troops. he gathers up about 60,000 troops, which is quite a lot for that time period, and about 40 war elephants. And he realizes that at this point, Rome has pretty much taken control of the sea. He's not going to be able to land by sea at Rome. But what he can do is he can go up and around. And he hopes that the tribes that have been conquered in the north will join him in pushing back against the Roman onslaught, the kind of conquering that took place in the first era of expansion. So, in the middle of, just as winter is ending, he starts marching his troops up and around. And he is able to make it all the way around to the north without alerting the Romans. So Rome wakes up one day and they hear a report that there are 23,000 troops that have made it all the way to their northern border, which is completely undefended because all of their troops are down in the south. So they send both consuls up to go fight Hannibal, and both consuls lose. But one of the consuls escapes and said, "Don't worry, we won." Afraid that if he came back and said that they lost, they would actually lose faith. So he says that they won, and Hannibal's like, you obviously didn't win. I killed all of your men. He actually hid in the mists. He waited for the morning mist to come, and as they got up to go and start marching, they marched literally into the center of his formation, and he slaughtered an entire legion of 20,000 troops in his first battle. So they're just literally ignoring him. And he's like, well, if you're going to ignore me, I'm just going to keep moving around. And for the next 14 years, they are unable to defeat Hannibal in battle. For 14 years, he just walks around Rome all over the Italian peninsula because his goal actually isn't to defeat Rome itself. It's to make it so that their allies turn against them. Right? He realizes that Rome has spent all this time conquering the peninsula, but these people aren't Romans, and Rome doesn't treat them as equals, so he's trying to turn them against him. And Rome realizes they're not going to defeat Hannibal in outright battle, so they start doing something called Flavian tactics. And Flavian tactics is just, anytime they go out to get food, we're going to attack the people getting food. No direct confrontation, right? We've lost every direct confrontation against this guy. We're not going to beat him in direct battle, so we're going to fight him and just kind of move our pawns back and forth. So 14 years, Rome wakes up every day afraid of Hannibal. Finally, someone gets the brilliant idea that if we can't defeat him here, then why don't we just go take Carthage? So that guy is by the name of Scipio, which is the best name of all time. And Scipio skips down to Carthage, gets some of the local tribesmen here to join him, and forces Hannibal to come back and fight him on the home turf. And Hannibal, curses that Carthage was just hold out. If their legions are gone, now I can finally take Rome. I've been working on this for 14, please let me go take Rome. And they're like, no, come protect us. What are you doing? And so rather than letting him finish the fight, they call him back, and he loses, actually outnumbering the Romans by quite a lot. He loses at the Battle of Zama because of cavalry tactics. So, Carthage gets, yes.
Did he have to walk all the way back, or did they get
No, they got ships from down here. They sailed back. So, Second Punic War. Do you guys want to come in and sit or anything? Is that okay? Yeah, please come sit.
Is there a chair?
Yeah.
The elephant?
But there's lots of floor space.
There's floor space here.
You mentioned the elephants.
Yeah, of the 40 elephants he brought, 23 made it to the Alps, 13 make it past the Alps, the other 12 die within the first 3 years of battle.
Oh my god.
So, no elephants, which is really sad. He does get sick at one point, and the elephant is he rides on the back of the elephant sick, but that's really all we know. Most of the elephants die in battle. The Romans get pretty good at killing elephants pretty quickly, which is incredibly sad. All right, so Second Punic War, it ends. One quick side story: as old men, Scipio gets sent out east to deal with another king, and Hannibal is there, and they apparently exchange a conversation as 65-year-old men, in which Scipio asks him, who do you think the best general of all time is? And Hannibal says, Alexander the Great. And he's like, who after that? And he's like, probably Pyrrhus, who's another famous general. And he's like, who after that? And he's like, well, me. And he's like, I thought you'd rate yourself higher. And Hannibal says, well, if I defeated you, I would have. And that's their famous exchange. Anyway, all right. For the next 40 years or so, they're just extracting tribute from Carthage. They're just taking money from Carthage. And every single time this guy Cato the Elder gets up to talk for the next 40 years, he finishes every single speech with like, yo, we have to destroy Carthage. I'm just reminding you, these people hate us. They almost destroyed us. We have to go destroy them. Like, he finishes every time he talks for 40 years with this. And finally, Scipio's great-grandson goes and defeats Carthage. They salt the earth. They sell everyone into slavery. And that is the end of the Punic Wars. Now, so from the Punic Wars, we are going to slide very, very quickly into authoritarianism, right? I like to think of the Punic Wars as very simply Rome's Iraq, right? From that moment in which we started investing troops in outside sources and destabilized a region for a specific resource, namely oil, which for them was just like control of trade, right? You're going to start to see authoritarian policies and a rapid swing of like liberal policies to conservative policies back and forth. So it's kind of similar to like once societies start using violence externally, eventually that violence is going to come home. So this is kind of the flow chart as we fall away. I'm going to go through each one. Punic Wars leave Rome a hot mess. All right? These soldiers, in order to be a soldier in Rome, you had to own property. But if you've been away fighting for 20 years, no one's working your farm. So all of the farms fall into disrepair. The wives and the kids sell the farms to create large-scale plantations. These plantations are called lafundias. They are the basis for the modern slave plantation that takes place in early America. Lafundias are worked by slaves, POWs, caught from the Punic Wars. So you have large-scale plantations, you have slave labor, and you have a middle and lower class that's returning from war to find out all of their land has been sold. So they all move to the cities. So you have massive unemployment, you have populations in the cities, and you have a massive slave class. I'm talking like 30% of the population is a slave class that's doing all the work. So middle class middle class has sold its land, lower class can't get any work. The Gracchi Bros are two Democrats that try and fix it. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, come after the Punic Wars. They are the grandson of that first Scipio, right? So they are, I would say, like a Bush family, would kind of be the way that I would describe it. And they start to think about, how do we fix this problem? And Tiberius Gracchus actually has a really easy answer. There's laws that say that people should only have a certain amount of land. There's public laws that say any individual person can only own 500 acres of land. But what the patricians have been doing is they've been saying, well, I have 500 acres, and my brother has 500 acres, and my daughter has 500 acres, and these 4 dead relatives have 500 acres, etc. And they've been expanding their owning, like claiming this public land that hasn't been taken throughout the course of the war. So what Tiberius says is, all right, here's what we're going to do. You only get 500 people. You only get 500 acres. No more. We're breaking up these slave plantations. We're giving the land back to this massive amount of soldiers who just fought and died for us for the past 60 years. And we're not, like, they're coming home to nothing. They're coming home to nothing. We need to break the land up. So the senators go nuts because they're the ones who have all the power. So at a political rally where Tiberius Gracchus goes to run for tribune a second time, which was against the rules. He wasn't supposed to do it. He really wasn't. But he goes to run for tribune a second time. The senators wait for him to signal. They wait for something that they can point out. And in the ensuing reaction, they beat him to death with a chair in public during this rally. Now, once Tiberius Gracchus dies, his brother says, if they're going to use mob violence to silence our voices, we're going to use mob violence to make our voices heard. And this is where the slippery slope starts. Tiberius breaks the rules by saying, hey, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm going to get things done myself. In the same way Obama expands power and starts to use executive orders more because of the Republican Senate stopping everything he did, Tiberius Gracchus brought laws that should have gone to the Senate and through the consuls directly to the assemblies. He says, you're the people this is going to affect. You're the ones that should vote on it. And when another tribune started to veto everything he did, he said, we should have this person removed. And he gets a vote to have that person removed, and that guy vetoes the vote on his own removal, because remember, he can veto everything. So Tiberius Gracchus gets 2 of his friends to literally say, remove him from the chamber. He can't veto if he's not here. And they grab him and they carry him out. And so Tiberius starts the ball rolling by using this violence, and then that violence gets turned against him. Now his brother gets even more intense. His brother isn't just voting for land reform. His brother's like, yo, it's not enough that we just give people land. We also got to make sure that they can be fed. And also, since everyone in Italy has been fighting in our legions, they should probably be citizens and get the same rights as the rest of us. So, Gaius Gracchus was known for when he gave speeches, his face would turn completely red. They had like nicknames of him, of like devil face or red face. But he would turn completely red, and he would get really excited, and he would talk really fast. So, as he tries to push forward these first reforms, first the land reform, then the cheap grain reform, then the citizenship reform, right? Which honestly by that point probably should have happened. The senators are so afraid of him because he's his brother, because of his brother, that they stop every single thing he's trying to do, even though it has massive social appeal. Right? And he runs for one term. He gets some of his stuff through. Not all of it, but some of it through. The Senate can't stop him. And he runs for a second term, just like his brother, breaking their traditions. And when he goes to run for a third term, that's when the Senate acts again. And once again, using political violence, they say that he is unable to win that third term. They say that he's a traitor, and they start killing his followers. They kill about 3,000 of the people who follow him, and they kill a fellow, like his supporter, and he gets killed. So once Gaius Gracchus is killed, we are now in a place where political violence has become the norm in Rome. All right, I like to think of it, if we imagine back to earlier this year, if Trump's assassination went through and Trump was killed, and the next day they shot AOC, that would be like the level we're talking about of like the normalization of political violence at this point, right? And so, reform movement is officially underway, but its cheerleaders are kind of killed, and there's going to be a reaction. Sorry, it'll pop back in a sec. The reaction is a split in the Senate. On one side of the Senate, you have the populares, and the populares are our modern-day liberals. They're literally people that believe that only by taking care of the social issues in Rome will the republic survive. If we don't take care of the poor, they will overthrow us and riot. If we don't take care of our allies, they will leave us and turn against us. If we don't feed people, they're going to start to come into, like, they're going to start tearing things down. So the populares are basically what I like to think of as like the modern day Democrats. The optimates are the exact opposite way. The entire time the optimates say we need to take Rome back to its glorious past. Literally make Rome great again. All right, that's like literally what they're saying. And the whole time as they go through this, the optimates are arguing and using the language of like, we are here for freedom, we're here to protect tradition, we're the ones actually defending Rome. And often they actually do. It's actually really hard to make one of them a good guy and a bad guy, because when battle and fighting actually breaks out, it's very often the optimates that are actually defending against someone trying to use popular support to take over the country. So it's hard to like make them good or bad. But on the surface, it's very easy to map on Democrat and Republican onto these two figures. Okay, so Marius and Sulla. The best way I would describe Marius and Sulla is Marius is Obama. He comes after the Gracchi brothers and he says what they were doing is right. And I have a way to fix these problems. Earlier I said up until this point, in order to be a soldier, you had to own land, right? But what Marius says is, if we've got all of these homeless people, why don't we just put them in the army and we'll give them land afterwards? And so the Marian reforms change the idea of what it means to be a soldier in Rome. And instead of being loyal to Rome because you're defending your land, what the Marian reforms do is they allow you to become a soldier, but you have to fight for 20 years, and the person who chooses the land that you get is your general. So generals now become the people that these soldiers are loyal to. And as we get further along, you're going to see all of these times that people are going to try and invade and take over, and they're doing that because if they don't get any of the things they work for. You only get your paycheck at the end of your service. So the Marian reforms reshape the way the military is. All right. Marius really wants to be the hero. He wants to save everything, he wants to do the right thing, and he passes a number of the reforms that the Gracchus tried to push through. He passes some of the citizenship reforms, not all of it, but some of them. He passes some land reforms, and he gets cheaper grain. But as Marius takes over, those other Italians that we talked about, they're finally done with the alliance that they've had. They're not getting paid, right? Reform has actually been put down, so they break away. And Marius actually spends most of his time as consul, 6 years in a row, actually attacking and destroying, reconquering all of those neighboring cities that had made up the Italian peninsula. So even though he's the reformer, he's the one conquering, destroying, and kind of enforcing the empire's regime over the neighbors, right? Meanwhile, Sulla is out conquering new territories. So, Marius is old. He's really old, right? He's in his, late 60s. And Sulla has been elected consul. He's been elected to go conquer a new area. Someone's rebelled against Rome far away. And Sulla leaves the city. And Marius is like, I don't want Sulla to be in charge. I want to be in charge. And Marius takes his own troops, who are also older, comes into the city, and kills off all of Sulla's followers. Murders all the people that support Sulla. So when the next election for consul comes around, guess who they vote for? Marius. Now, Marius at this point is Biden. He is barely holding it together cognitively. But in fact, he's jumbled in his speech. He's tripping over things, all the things that we saw at the end of Biden's presidency is literally happening. So, the person who's actually in charge is a guy named Cinna. Cinna will be important only because of Caesar a little bit later. So, Marius is in charge. Sulla finally defeats his opponent. Here's what Marius has done. He's like, all right, let's go back. And Sulla comes back into Rome, and for 5 days lets his troops do whatever they want. Any person who had supported Marius, killed. Any wealthy person who had backed the Marian reforms, killed, right? Over the 5 days, 60,000 people are slaughtered. So Sulla comes back in, undoes all of the reforms that Marius does, and literally tries to bring Rome back by focusing on taking power away from the tribunes, giving money back to the upper class. He's giving tax breaks, not literally, but literally, right? He's literally giving land of the Marius followers to his own soldiers, and he very much becomes a Trump-like figure. He declares himself dictator for life. He takes total control over the entire Roman government and basically turns back the clock on the reforms back to before the Punic Wars. Yes.
Where's the Senate in all of this?
Senate is kind of split between Marius and Sulla, but a lot of the ones who had supported Marius know when Sulla's coming back that they need to escape the city, so many of them flee for their lives. So the only people left in charge are those super wealthy patricians, right, that have been supporting Sulla and his ideas the whole way through, namely the ones that survived the Marian purges just a few years before. So, Sulla makes himself dictator for life. He undoes all of the reforms, and then steps down. And this is what's really interesting about Sulla. Sulla is a Trump-like figure who, imagine if Trump was elected dictator, pushes through all of his Project 2025, but then steps down from government, right? So Sulla sets up the next era of Rome, because by stepping down, he leaves a power vacuum. Now, when Sulla comes back in, there's a young man. This young man is actually Marius's nephew. And he's 20 years old, 22 years old. His name is Gaius Julius Caesar. And Gaius Julius Caesar goes to Sulla and says, I know who my uncle is. Please do not kill me. And Sulla says, divorce your wife. If you divorce your wife, I won't kill you. But prove you're loyal to me by leaving the person you love. And that night, Caesar hides his wife in a wagon, sneaks her out, and goes to the farthest reaches of the empire because he will not divorce his wife for Sulla. And hides out in the farthest reaches of the empire for the rest of Sulla's reign. Now, the interesting thing about Caesar is by far the best general that Rome ever had. And there are some pretty good generals that we've talked about so far, especially Hannibal. Caesar is the best general that Rome ever had, by far. He's also the best speaker that Rome ever had. Caesar had a couple of other weird things. He always wore really loose clothes, right? He was going bald, so he would wear his laurel as often as possible, and he was incredibly vain. They would say you would often find him looking at himself in the mirror, which I just love that idea of just like every time he walked past a mirror, he would have to look at it. But he was an incredible speaker. He's an incredible speaker. So, after Sulla, the Senate needs someone to do their dirty work for them. So they pick this guy. This is Pompey, right? Not Pompey, Pompey. Pompey basically tries to continue Sulla's things without as much of the violence. But Pompey's kind of poor. So they need someone else to come and help him. In order to bankroll Pompey, they get this guy Crassus. Crassus is literally Scrooge McDuck. He's just the most corrupt money person. Crassus would do this thing where he would set fire to apartments, go to the people while their apartments were building, be like, you're going to lose everything. I will give you money for its value if you let me buy it right now. People would pay him, they would take the money, and then he would send his already set up firemen to go put out the fires so he would buy these blocks for free. That's what I'm talking about, how corrupt Crassus was. That's Crassus. Spartacus, the Roman gladiator that fights back, the person who kills him is Crassus because he pays other people to turn against him. He is like he's just a mob figure. All right. These guys are not really well liked. And so they need someone who has popular support. As soon as Sulla dies, Caesar comes back to Rome. And the job that he takes and gets himself in charge of the gladiator games. And Caesar knows how to put on a show. The people love. When I say love Caesar, I mean they love Caesar. He's giving out free food. He's throwing parties. He's doing everything that people want. He's putting forward reforms that he hopes the people will like. He doesn't even have the power to do it, but he's whispering in people's ears and saying, by the way, this game, if you come to this game, I will continue to support citizenship. I will continue to support low grain prices. I will continue. So the people love Caesar. So they need Caesar. So this becomes the first triumvirate. And the first triumvirate is basically, they take the power vacuum left by Sulla, and in doing so, claim what you might believe to be a 3-part dictatorship. Now, Crassus dies of old age, and we're left with Caesar and Pompey. Pompey gets scared that Caesar is gaining too much power, so he sends him up to Gaul. Gaul being France and Spain. And so Caesar's there for a pretty long time. Right? He sends him there for almost 14 years. Caesar's up there conquering that area, and Pompey is afraid of Caesar's popularity. He's winning battle after battle after battle. He's sending back all of these slaves and money, and Pompey doesn't know what to do with it. So he tells Caesar to come back to Rome, but come alone. And Caesar's like, I don't know if I should do that. Now, ever since Sulla, there has been a rule, and now we're talking 30 years later, right? There's been a rule that no Roman legion may cross a river called the Rubicon. The Rubicon is a northern river. And Caesar gets to the Rubicon, and he pauses his legion, and waits there for literally only 10 minutes, and he says, well, the die is cast, and he orders his legions to go in. Pompey, finding out that Caesar is coming, tries to escape, right? He escapes out of Rome. Caesar walks into Rome to cheers and realizes he has to go chase Pompey. So he goes and finds Pompey up in Macedonia, in Greece, catches him probably over here or so. Pompey actually escapes that battle, and he runs away to Egypt. Now, in charge of Egypt is actually a Greek by the name of Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals. And of the Ptolemaic reign, there are two. There's Ptolemy VIII and his sister, Cleopatra. Right? So Ptolemy VIII is smart enough to know that this guy is bad news. So he cuts off Pompey's head and he sends it to Caesar in a box. And the saddest part is when Caesar gets the box, he actually cries because he was going to forgive Pompey. He's like, you killed my oldest friend. And so when he gets to Egypt, the first thing he does is he like yells at Ptolemy. He's like, how could you not like let me talk to him? How could you kill him? And the kid is like, I don't know, I thought he was your enemy, I don't know what to do. So Cleopatra's there, Caesar's there, and Caesar's already now become dictator. Like he's there, and he goes, and Cleopatra realizes that she has a chance here, because in the Potomac reign, assassinations are incredibly normal. Cleopatra's mother was killed, her father was killed, all in this like crazy like murder for the throne thing that happens. So, this is whenever I talk about Cleopatra, I always start with how she's written about, which is just like so incredibly sexist. Her actual beauty itself was not remarkable, which is just like, what a rude way to start a sentence about someone. The contact of her presence was irresistible. Attraction of her person joining with the charm of a conversation was bewitching. Cleopatra was the first one in the Potomac reign who actually knew how to speak Egyptian. Every single one of her ancestors, for the last 8 generations, had been running the country without speaking the language of the people. But Cleopatra knew that if she could get Caesar on her side, she has 2 things. 1, she doesn't need to fight a war against the Romans. And 2, she could legitimize her reign. So she literally rolls herself up in a carpet. I don't know if many of you know this story. She rolls herself up in a carpet, and she had herself delivered to Caesar. Now, when I told this to my 6th graders, one of them raised their hand and was like, was she clothed? And I was like, I can't answer that for you, but no, she was not clothed when she showed. So she comes out, and Caesar's kind of speechless, and she literally wins him over that first day. Within a week later, 2 of Caesar's most trusted protectors drown Cleopatra's brother when he goes to bathe in the Nile. He goes to do his ritual bathing, and he swims out, and he gets pulled underwater and is never seen again, except his body floats up a couple miles downstream. So Cleopatra has Caesar kill her brother. So now Cleopatra's in charge. And the craziest thing about Cleopatra is Cleopatra realizes that her greatest power is actually to turn Caesar Egyptian. So what Cleopatra does is she starts to whisper and frame Caesar as the god Horus, and she is the god Isis, and she puts herself on this giant barge filled with hundreds of dancers, painted in gold at the top, and she puts Caesar on like a little boat that's coming from the other direction, and she has them meet in the middle of the river as the sun's going down and everything is golden, and all of the people of Egypt have come out to see this spectacle, and it literally looks like gods. It looks like gods. And so she has the temple, I think it starts with a D, my brain is slipping, but she has a temple built in her name, and she convinces the Egyptian people that not only is she the goddess Isis, but this Roman is actually an Egyptian god. And Caesar spends quite some time in Egypt. Enough time that he gets Cleopatra pregnant. Now, as soon as Cleopatra is pregnant, Caesar realizes his job is done, and he takes her back to Rome with him. Once there, he starts passing reforms, right? Really intense reforms. Like solving all the problems of the lower class reforms. Within the next 8 years, I don't have the list with me, but he passes like 23 major laws that radically change the society in Rome. Full citizenship, free grain, shortens the period of being a soldier from 20 years to 15 years, higher salary for everyone, cleaning the streets, gets rid of the corrupt firemen, public offices for policemen, public firemen, public schooling, right? He does all of these things to radically change the society. And in doing so, the people love him more and more and more. And Mark Antony, who is his second in command, right, keeps trying to say, like, Caesar, you're already a king. Just accept the crown. The people are chanting for you, right? And Caesar's like, nope, not doing it. Tries it 3 times to get Caesar to say, you should be king. And Caesar's like, no, I'm sorry, man, I'm not doing it. And Ides of March rolls around, Caesar's heading to the Forum, Caesar gets assassinated, right? And Caesar's assassination literally comes from the fact that the Senate doesn't know what to do with him because Caesar, who's supposed to be an optimist, is doing all the things that the populares have been trying to do since the beginning of me lecturing an hour ago. He's actually solving the problems, right, of the society. And this is, for me, the most dangerous part of this story. Because the person who becomes the dictator by doing what the people need. Right? It's actually like quite scary that if we think about the election we just had, Trump got elected because a lot of people voted for that. Because that's what they wanted. Right? Now, with Caesar's death, we have another hole. The coup is always attempted, but it's never the first coup that ruins a country. Right? It's usually the second. And enter Octavian. Now, Octavian's going to have so many different names over the course of his life, it's stupid. He starts off as Octavian, he becomes Gaius Julius Caesar, eventually he gets called Augustus, which is the name by most people know him. But Octavian is actually a pretty sickly kid. He's not really that special. He's the niece of Caesar, he gets raised by Julia the Elder, that's Caesar's sister. Caesar is impressed by him as a young boy, but he doesn't really do much. Every time Caesar tries to take him into battle, he's sick. And so they keep having this like rumor that he's a coward because he's literally just like a really sickly kid as he goes into battle. When he goes to school, he makes best friends with a guy by the name of Agrippa. Every time in the record that it says that Octavian or Augustus won a battle, it was actually this dude, right? Agrippa is just like his brolic friend who's like the perfect soldier. He's like 6'4", which is gigantic back at that time. And he just like, every time Octavian has a problem, it's actually like Agrippa who solves it for him. So Octavian's kind of the brains, Agrippa's kind of the brawn of their thing. So Octavian, right, Caesar dies. And Mark Antony, who's been supporting Caesar through all of this, who's the one that tried to make him king, who's the one that literally like has fought with him for the past 23 years, who was in Gaul with him through all the stuff, Mark Antony opens up the will, expecting that all of Caesar's riches go to him, and nothing goes to him. In fact, he wasn't even on the list if it goes to Octavian. And if Octavian was dead, it would have gone to Brutus, the guy who murdered him. Mark Antony isn't even on the list. So, we now have a situation where you have Octavius, the heir of Caesar, who's 19 years old and has just been given the country of Rome's love and millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars. You have Mark Antony, who's Caesar's right-hand man, who's been actually running things for the past 20 years, right? And you don't need to care about him. He's there, but he doesn't really do anything. And so there's this moment in which Mark Antony says, like, all right, the first thing we have to do is we have to go kill the people who killed Caesar. Mark Antony takes the legions, rushes out of the city, and goes to go kill the people who killed Caesar. And he leaves Octavian in Rome. And Octavian actually is like, I don't want a public position. Like, I'm not here to take over the way my father did. Right? He like refuses to step into this position of power, which makes the people want to give him more power even more. So the Senate actually sends him, even though they just killed his father, the Senate sends him to go talk to Mark Antony, because Mark Antony's acting a little like a tyrant up north. He's getting a little murdery with some other people up north. And Mark Antony and Octavius have this meeting. They hate each other. And when I say they hate each other, I mean they hate each other. Like Mark Antony, they say like Mark Antony's face twisted in rage every time he looked at Octavian. He just hates him. This is the guy that just keeps them from killing each other. He's just that's his holy foe. But they meet and they're like, look, we can have Rome. We can have Rome. I don't know why we're fighting each other. Like, if my father, I think Octavian says like, if my father loved you, why can you not love me? I think is his line. And so they cut a deal. And the deal is very simple. They're going to kill the people that killed Caesar. Octavian's going to go back, calm the Senate down and get everything in control, and he's going to send Mark Antony everywhere Mark Antony wants to go and support him with soldiers. So, for the next series of years, Mark Antony travels all over the edges of the empire, conquering areas, and Octavian gets more and more love from the people of Rome, turning down every single thing that they could give him until they finally convince him to take a role. But no, I don't want it. But yes, I'll finally take it if you really want me to. And we get to, of course, the second time Cleopatra shows up. Mark Antony calls Cleopatra and says, like, are you involved in the murder of Caesar? Cleopatra's like, nah, I have his kid right here with me. Absolutely not, Caesarion. And she realizes the same thing that she did last time. That if she can get Mark Antony on her side, then Egypt's protected. We don't need to fight another war. We don't need to get conquered. All I have to do is get this one guy to like me, or love me, and the whole country's safe. So, Cleopatra seduces Mark Antony. Now, only one problem. Mark Antony is married to Octavian's sister. And Octavian really loves his sister. And Octavia really loves Mark Antony. And she keeps she keeps going to him every day. When is Mark Antony coming home? Have you heard from Mark Antony? And Octavian knows what's going on with Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And for 10 years, Mark Antony cheats on Octavia. 10 years. And after like 5 years, Octavia knows. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And finally, Octavian has enough. And he sends Agrippa to go deal with Mark Antony. 2 reasons. One, Caesarion, Caesar's real son, is 12. Which means in a couple of years, he has the real right to the throne. He's Caesar's real son. And Octavian knows that if Caesarion grows up, there's going to be trouble. 2, the grain shipments from Egypt have started becoming less and less and more expensive as Mark Antony and Cleopatra start to realize that maybe they don't need Rome if they have Mark Antony's allegiance. So there's a little bit of greed that happens there. Anyway, you know the story. Agrippa shows up. He defeats Mark Antony and Cleopatra's things. Mark Antony thinks Cleopatra gets killed, so he kills himself. Cleopatra then shows up. She kills herself. The act like the Romeo and Juliet story, directly stolen from this interaction. Okay, and we're left... Oh, there's Cleopatra. And we're left with Octavian in charge. I have one final story before we get to the effects. Yeah, would you pass this to me? Yeah. Mark Antony and Cleopatra's kids are not killed, though Caesarion is. And Octavian has a daughter who he doesn't like very much. He marries her to Agrippa. Agrippa's like 65, she's like 14. And she cheats on Agrippa often. And so he breaks him up, and then he marries her to another guy whose name doesn't matter. And while she's married to the second guy, a dashing young Egyptian catches her eye. Mark Antony's son. And they have a torrid love affair until Octavian catches them, kills Mark Antony's son, and sentences her to exile in Corsica and never says her name in public again. But when we look at Mark Antony's son's writing, it was a play for the throne. It was a play for the throne. So even though she was using him, he was using her to hopefully be able to assassinate Octavian, etc. Octavian doesn't do well setting up his empire. 2 generations after, we're going to get Caligula. So his whole plan of trying to set up this empire isn't going to go so well. But what he does do is he does create the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana is a period of peace for the people in Rome, not for the people anywhere on the borders, but a period of peace inside Rome, which might be similar to America from 1970 to 1995, right? Relative peace, economic prosperity, due to controlling most of the trade routes and shipments. Now, the important parts of this story, I think, is to understand a couple of key takeaways. That the most important thing that a republic can do is take care of its poor. every single person who gained power throughout this entire story used the needs of those in society that society wasn't taking care of to claim power. When I think about the red states that voted the way they did in these past few years, there's a reason that their level of education is lowest. There's a reason their levels of poverty are the lowest. People who whose society does not take care of will find ways to get themselves taken care of, ideologically, whether or not actually, right? So actually the first way to protect a republic is to protect those weakest members of it. The second thing is political violence ends a republic. When you look at Japan before World War II, there are 36 political assassinations between 1918 and 1938. 36 political assassinations, right? As soon as political violence becomes the norm, right? As soon as it is okay to assassinate political figures, even if they are seemingly tyrannical, it's over for a republic, because no voice becomes safe, both either for the good guys or the quote-unquote bad guys, right? Tiberius Gracchus did everything he did for the absolute right reasons. To give land to soldiers that fought and died was 100% a legitimate thing, especially when those in power were breaking the law. But as soon as he has that other tribune removed, as soon as he expands executive power, right? As soon as Obama starts using the executive order as a way to get around the Senate, there is no way that that is not continued and weaponized, right? The limits of executive power in general are there because while you may believe that your cause is just and you're doing it for the right reasons, someone will do it for the wrong reasons, claiming it to be in freedom. Lastly, the Senate would never give up its power in Rome, ever. The only way people in power give up power is if they're given something else in return, either financially or socially, right? And if we look at the rise of the Instagram right, and we look at the rise of Trump's cabinet, these people that had some sort of social power and are now using that to claim political power, right? There is a reason that that exchange works, right? In order to have someone give up power, they need to be given something in return. The Senate needed some sort of consolation, right? They needed to feel heard. They needed to feel seen. And last one, which is what we're seeing right now, is leaders always use the justification of saving as a means to destroy those who oppose them. Right? That's the space that we live in. That's the water we're swimming in right now. Now, not all is lost, right? Every reaction in one way, we'll see an equal reaction in the other way. As long as that reaction doesn't have political violence, anti-corruption campaigns are actually pretty effective in republics, right? And many republics have been pulled back from collapse by having anti-corruption or taking care of those lowest in society. A clear understanding that those at the top of society who are abusing their power are the ones that need to be controlled has been effective in the same way Julius Caesar worked as an optimate, but actually was doing everything for the people. Right? And we don't know what would have happened because he got killed before he could finish. So, Rome, for the next 300 years, will become a hot mess. Right? There are some good emperors. There are some bad emperors. It's what people spend a lot of time reading about. But the end goal is this, that a republic is a slippery slope. And if you don't put the brakes on early, it slides far and fast. Anyway. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to take some questions if you have them. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Questions?
When Caesar was coming back and crossed that river, Marius had already been killed and that whole thing. But were the laws concerning soldiers loyal to their generals still? Is that why they crossed, because they were still getting their land from him?
Marian reforms will exist all the way through the rest of the empire. Actually, it's one of the reasons that the empire lasts as long as it does, because you needed to be loyal to your general, or you weren't going to get paid.
Yeah, you don't have house.
Yeah, exactly, right? So yeah, and also like they loved Caesar. Caesar would do silly things. He made their swords made of silver, so they looked really pretty and people didn't want to lose them. He did things like he gave like 85% of his own personal wealth to his soldiers. When he died, he actually made his house public gardens and gave like a second house to Octavian, right? So he does all of these things over and over to like generate love with his people. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Would you consider the packs from Golden Age for like similar to any other Golden Age?
Pax Romana is interesting. The bureaucracy and systems that are in place are so strong that they can survive emperors like Caligula, right? And which makes me think about like, though it was an empire with one person in charge, the power was actually really disseminated in a way that if we imagine the states start to gain much more rights in reaction to this like oppressive federal government, right? That might be a similar system that we have, in which the states really gain much more independence in reaction to like unstable leader. So second thing about the Pax Romana is there's such a massive slave class, like 40% in the city of Rome, 30% in the provinces, that like most people are middle class, because the lower class is either off fighting as soldiers, right? If you're lower class, you're going to go fight. That's pretty much all you can do. And if you get back, you got land. So you're moving from lower class to middle class. So there actually isn't there's not that much of a lower class in Rome at the time. They're just forcing all of them to go fight. So it's actually it's not that bad of a time to live in if you look at like comparative to other times there, unless you're on the borders. Borders are a problem. Anything else?
Eliot, a falling republic being saved by at the end you mentioned a anti-corruption campaign. What would you point to?
All right, so Brazil coming out of its dictatorship would be a really good example. Now, it's not that much better, but you went from a full-on dictatorship to a semblance of a democracy, right? There's still corruption, but the entire way the dictatorship fell was through like large amounts of anti-corruption campaigns. And if you look at them in the 80s with like the rise of Lula, etc., right, like all of his campaign was run as an anti-corruption campaign too. So I would say Hungary before the last few years would have been a good example, but not anymore. The goal of an anti-corruption campaign in a republic is to say it's often targeted to a political party, right? But it's basically like this political party has been breaking these rules, and here's what our political party promises not to do. The problem is like the Chinese kind of said it best, like any dynasty, will eventually become corrupt over time and needs to be refreshed. We just haven't had a refresh in quite some time. If you look at like the way power was amassed in previous societies, anytime like a king or a kingdom would gain a ton of power, eventually its neighbors would turn against it and kind of knock it back. But since 1945, America's money system hasn't been knocked back. There's been no moment where those who have amassed wealth have had to disseminate some of that wealth. And so we've seen, like, we're getting close to a point where that conflict becomes violent. That's the danger. If it isn't violent, then we'll all be a lot happier, right? That's the goal, right? Any other questions? Yeah.
The Cleopatra we all know and love is Cleopatra the Seventh, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe so. Yeah, super smart. Brilliant person. Her ability to use religious iconography and like myth, because the Egyptians are the most religious people of all time, right? There's like every single thing is based on godly understanding. So her ability to like harness that is like truly genius in a way that you don't see leaders able to do very often.
I mean, do you think it was genuine,
I don't know if that matters.
or? Yeah.
I think because she's a Greek, it is interesting to think about like After Alexander the Great, that was my keep it under an hour time. After Alexander the Great breaks up his empire, there's a really good hardcore history on like what happens the day Alexander the Great dies. The chaos is incredible. It's like super wonderful. But like when Ptolemy takes over, like he takes over brutally. Now she's 8 generations later, but the level of like assassination, like being born in Ptolemaic dynasty basically meant you're dying as a kid, right? They were assassinating their brothers in the crib. Like it's bad. So she was raised in like what you can imagine is like every day expecting that she's going to die. So it is hard to think of her as like anything but a tragic figure. And I find that like her choice to seduce Caesar and seduce Mark Antony is like a way to avoid her country being invaded by Rome. Like she manages to win a war without fighting it by just seducing the leaders. It's kind of incredible. It's kind of incredible. Yeah, it's so genius. It's so genius. Anything else?
Oh, I guess I have another question. When she was with Caesar in Rome, how much influence do you think she had on his reforms?
Well, that's the question. The Romans hated her. They called her a witch, and they said that like she had bewitched him. They had a pretty intense belief in witchcraft. Most of their medicine was religious up until like they conquered the Greeks, and the Greeks were like, stop doing that and do real medicine. So they really didn't like her. She had his ear. She definitely had his ear. But he would very reluctantly bring her into public because one, he was also married the whole time, and his wife also. That was the same wife that like he had protected from Sulla. It might have been the second one by that point because there was a few. Oh no, yeah, he had divorced that one, so it was his third by that point. So by that point, maybe not as much. I would say it could be said that she definitely had influence on the reforms because they were spending a lot of time together, and she definitely had his ear at that point.
Did she have interest to reform Rome?
I mean,
Was that in her gain, theoretically?
Yeah, that's what
I'm
I
not
was
sure.
thinking.
I'm not sure. I mean, you have to understand that the Romans are, the only way Rome survives is through slavery, right? That's the part I left out, right? Like their entire economic system is based on slavery, so they need to keep expanding. The empire will eventually fall because of something called systems collapse, and systems collapse is when it costs too much money to keep things. You expand so much, then you've invested so much money in things that it costs too much to keep the system going. So I want you to imagine if our electricity doubled and our rent doubled and the cost of food doubled, right? All of us can't afford our basic needs. The entire system collapses because everything's too expensive because globalization, it becomes too much to import oil across the world. Like, do you see what I'm saying? So systems collapse is that like, you can't go back. You can't get rid of the things that you have because you're in this international system. But to keep each part going costs too much. That's like the big fear, right? That the way our society falls apart is through this idea of systems collapse. That's why the empire fell, because it cost too much to keep going and they made too many enemies. So like those parallels are pretty clear. Systems collapse is scary. I think. I'm not sure. She definitely wanted to protect the Egyptians, though. I know that. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's there. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.